This is Dr. Carol Mountain, and I want to call this meeting to order. Can I have a roll call of the members, please?
Cheryl Turner, public member here.
Thank you. Donna? Uh-oh.
Donna Norton, LVN member.
Paula Amizola, public member.
Thank you very much. So that gives us a quorum. And can we please have an introduction of the committee members, although we just all said our names. Starting with Paula.
Introduction, is there something you would like us to include?
I think we just say I think we already did it because you said you're a public member and everybody already said theirs. Ms. Yamaguchi, will that suffice for the introduction of committee members?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, it should.
Could we please have an introduction of the board staff and Department of Consumer Affairs Legal Counsel?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Kenneth Swenson, your staff counsel, attorney 3, general counsel of the board.
Thank you, Madam Chair. With us today, this is Elaine Yamaguchi, the executive officer. With us today, we've got Arlene Nunez and Geraldine Marcino from the Education Division, Cindy Fairchild, Jessica Gomez, Beth DeYoung, Sue Ellen Clayworth, Faith Silverman, our NECs, Vicki Lyman, our AEO, and our esteemed host and moderator, Vicki Saavedra. I think that's everybody. And if it's not, I do apologize.
Thank you, Ms. Yamaguchi. We'd like to extend our welcome to the stakeholders who are attending this meeting and to any other community members that have also chosen to attend. Let's see. Ms. Yamaguchi, would you like to address the discussion and possible action on special meeting on vocational nursing and psychiatric technician education modalities?
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is Elaine. As the committee will recall, the board and committee have both had some conversation and discussion originating with a proposal from the Unitech colleges to discuss some changes and some adaptations of the nursing education curriculum, specifically in terms of clinical experience and the use of simulation and telehealth, et cetera. We've had a number of conversations with the Unitech folks, and I think the committee will recall that the last conversation with them specifically, we decided and the board approved the concept of a special meeting just to discuss their proposal. Now, in the ensuing month or two, we've had a number of conversations with other parties, and we discussed with the executive committee a week or so ago that really one thing that we think is called for at this time is a much larger discussion and more in-depth discussion for the whole of the board, specifically on those teaching education modalities, specifically what it means when we say simulation, clinical experience, because there's a vast array and big spectrum of what that actually entails. A discussion, I think, on telehealth, because at this point, up until now, that hasn't really been part of the VN or PT scope of practice, but this is something that I know that is an emerging need, and it's been very heartily encouraged by the governor's office as well. So there's a lot of factors out there that we wanted to, I think, spend a little time making sure that all the board members had as much information and opportunity to discuss with experts as possible. So one thing that we wanted to propose, and we discussed this with the execs, is spending some time. As you'll recall, the board used to engage in a Wednesday before the board meeting when they were up in Sacramento to do training, education, and planning. What we wanted to suggest is for the November meeting to spend the Wednesday afternoon before the hearings on Thursday, and perhaps ask the folks from the National Council for the State Boards of Nursing to provide some information on really the nationwide trends and discussions on simulation, on nursing education. And we've also had a very brief conversation with our colleagues at the Board of Registered Nursing to talk a little bit about how the RN programming and education dovetails or works with our own. We think we may want to also include the folks at CDPH to talk about the certified nursing assistants curriculum as well. So we hope to do that for this coming month, for this coming meeting in November. We're looking at that Wednesday, so about 1 till 5. Now, after that, we're recommending that the board hold a full day of discussion on the Wednesday before the February board meeting. And again, remember, this will be virtual, of course, to really, I think, spend time on the various types of nursing education modalities that are starting to emerge more and more as a need in the field. What we were suggesting is working with the NECs and other stakeholder partners to provide, I think, the real experts out in the field to provide some information and some demonstrations, possibly, if we can, really on what this means, because just simulation alone, there's such a vast array of, low resolution, high resolution. There's so many different types of simulation available that it's hard really to, I think, make a good reasoned decision and have a really good discussion on what that means if we don't really have, I think, a really good, deep understanding of how that spectrum plays out, so that I think it would enable the board members to have a better discussion focused on the Unitex proposal and make a better decision, or at least a stronger and more permanent decision. Because the one thing that's concerned us greatly with regard to the Unitech proposal, and that's just the simple fact of, once the board makes a decision to allow, permit, authorize the Unitech programs to do something, it is basically tantamount to making that decision, that determination available to basically every program that we certify in the state of California. So with that, let me pause for questions or comment.
This is Cheryl Turner, and I think that's a great suggestion. As a public member who has had, my experience in nursing is limited to being a candy striper in the past and representing those in the medical field. I think it would definitely benefit me as a public member to learn more about, this area, and it would definitely help me to do a better job as a board member. And whether that's training by adding an additional day or having a special meeting, it would be very helpful. So I would encourage members to vote for that.
Hi, this is Donna Norton. Elaine, did you say that would be before the February board? Did I hear that correct?
You did. So the really detailed, what we're thinking to do, and we'd be delighted for any suggestions from the committee members or other board members, is we thought to communicate out with the field, all the various, vendors, experts, the schools themselves, and ask if anybody would like to do a brief presentation, maybe 15 minutes, on a specific modality they really are very proud of or very curious about or have their own expertise. So we want to do that one day in February. The November meeting, what we want to do is talk briefly and really broadly, I think, about the nationwide trends.
Okay, thank you. I think that's also timely because it doesn't appear that we're going to be back to, this may be our new normal, and this may go in well into 2021, perhaps even into 2022, where we'll have limitations with students being able to be in the facilities, and I mean, who knows where we're going to end up. So it's probably a very timely discussion to have to fully understand the use of simulation versus hands-on. So that's a good idea.
Hi, this is Paula Amazola, public member. And for me, a couple of things come to mind. First, I am thinking about that this pandemic potentially can last, a year or two more, depending on the vaccine and depending on the availability of the vaccine. And I do think it's important for us to modernize our healthcare. I myself have had both telemedicine and in person during this pandemic doctor appointments. And so I can see as a public member the difference, and there is a difference. And I'm concerned that more mistakes happen during telemedicine and virtual types of environments, and that as a public member, I'm concerned that we might be putting our public at a higher risk. And the same token, if mistakes are made, then we might be putting brand new LVNs at risk for losing or putting their license on a probation because of these errors that may occur. Nonetheless, I am committed to ensuring that our healthcare delivery practices get modernized. And I think that in addition to receiving information, such as a presentation that was suggested, I would like to hear do a public comment, and I would encourage that we seek out public comment from all the stakeholders. I would like to hear from the nurse students. I would like to hear from the schools. I would like to hear from the public. And I'm not sure if we can do that in a survey type, and in addition, in a virtual meeting such as this. But I am very and actually, I forgot a stakeholder. We do need to hear from active nurses what they think of this idea. And so I encourage us to, in addition to learning what this simulation and receiving a formal type of presentation, that we create a public comment because I would like to hear what are the blind spots that we're not considering, and so that if or when we put this policy in place, as our EO said, it's going to impact broadly all our schools, and it's going to impact broadly the whole workforce of nurses. And I want to make sure that we have received public comment to eliminate those blind spots and create policy that has the least amount of consequences or unintended consequences. So those are my thoughts.
Ms. Yamaguchi, do we need to call for public comment on this?
I think that'd be a great idea. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
So can we open it up if there are any public questions or comments at this time?
This is the moderator. I do see one public member by the name of Lauren Jones. I will unmute her mic now. Lauren Jones, your mic is unmuted.
Okay, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. And my piece that I'm seeing as a nursing educator who's been around for more than a couple of years, unfortunately or fortunately, and what I'm seeing is that there is an assumption that this is going to be over and we're all going to go back to normal. And I think that from an educational standpoint, that is not going to occur. And I would strongly recommend maybe even developing an ad hoc committee of nursing educators along with your team to really explore some alternative clinical measures. I mean, it's possible for some labs to develop their own nurses station where you begin showing them what a day looks like in giving meds and providing care and in charting, all those kinds of things. And things that we know right now don't occur regularly on any clinical unit. We can't guarantee our students those same clinical experiences that that we think we can provide them, because they're not available as frequently as they were.
Thank you for your comments. And definitely something that's going on in the clinical facilities at this time.
Thank you.
Ms. Yamaguchi, did you have additional discussion on this special meeting?
Thank you, Madam Chair. No, at this point, I don't, although, as I said, we want to make these available first at our November meeting and then at our February meeting. And I will be updating this committee, of course, and the full board on that as things progress. But I want to, thank the committee members very much for their comments and perspectives, because first off, I think Ms. Norton is spot on, and I think Ms. Jones is right in the same vein of, this isn't going to be a temporary thing. This is going to be shaping how nurses are educated and trained probably for the foreseeable future, if not forever. And I like the idea of possibly putting together a working committee from the stakeholders, from the active educators. So we'll certainly, and of course, we'll keep you in mind, Ms. Jones. One of the NECs certainly will be getting a hold of you as we get forward. But anyways, I think at this point, Madam Chair, I don't know that the committee needs to act, although I think for the board meeting itself, we'll certainly want to have a lively discussion in the context of this committee's report.
Thank you, Ms. Yamaguchi. Certainly, I think everything we've heard from everyone has been very positive about having this type of a meeting and providing that education to the board members. So it's nice. We will move on to agenda item number 6, discussion and possible action on sunset legislation. Ms. Yamaguchi.
This is the moderator. One quick question for the attendee, Ms. Jones. Can you please lower your raised hand feature? Continue. Thank you.
Thank you, moderator. Ms. Yamaguchi?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Again, the committee will recall we've had a number of conversations leading up to sunset. And actually, let me just provide a little bit of a preview on the sunset process itself. As you know, we were supposed to have been heard this past March. We do not have a date certain, but we've been told, at least by the Senate committee, that we will be holding a hearing. They have not decided whether it'll be a live hearing or online, much like this meeting now. But we will be having a hearing this coming spring in March. They've asked us to provide some updates. They've specifically asked every board and bureau to provide some feedback and some information about how we have responded to COVID-19 and an operational standpoint. Our board will be updating the existing report, mostly looking at the statistics, but a few other areas where we believe there's been some updates and some changes. As you know, we will be asking for permission to move ahead with the program fees that the board has approved already. We have basically asked that this be included in the sunset bill. The board has discussed a number of times, dating back in many years, way before I joined the staff, the concept of a cite and fine program for the educational programs, much like the one we have for our licensees at this point. We believe that this would be a really valuable tool for the NECs to work with their assigned schools and programs to make sure that when they see violations and problems, they're able to make sure that they are fixed and complied with immediately, quickly. And the final thing that we want to make sure, we have a variety of concepts that we mean to move ahead with that I think will be presented to the board, mostly having to do with updating and clarifying our scope of practice, taking care of some obsolete things and fixing some other language. The one thing we do want to discuss, and that'll I'll get into more detail with it in our item 7, and that would be clarifying some scope of practice issues. We're going to be doing a vast amount of work, which has actually already started, really looking at our regulations, I think. But we would need to have the statutory authority to move ahead on all.
descriptions of what that means in real life. So I'm hoping that as we move into the clarification of scope of practice, that we can put more meat into it, or an addendum, or this is what it means, because so many times now, especially at least here in Northern California, perhaps because of CNA, we find ourselves where our scope will be determined by others than ourselves, and we have nothing to give out or to show. So I'm hoping that will be included in the clarification of scope of practice. And then if you can explain, like, what you mean by legislative action to change our scope of practice. That would help me better understand.
Madam Chair, if I may, thank you, Ms. Norton. I think you had the nail right on the head, that because our regulations and because our laws are very, very, well, necessarily vague and inexact, that has been a problem, I think, for a lot of our licensees. And I know that you personally have encountered a great many of them on the floor. Right. We think that there's a number of areas, and I think specifically right now we're talking about statutory authority, specifically about the administration of cosmetic procedures like Botox and its ilk. And as I said, I was going to discuss this a bit more. And I think the board members have seen some examples in the disciplinary files as well. But there are some other areas where I think there's some fuzziness, I think. And I think when once we get to the point where we have some language laid out, actually we specifically wanted to see if our licensee board members would be willing and able to look at that language from that perspective as a licensee, as a nurse, as a psych tech, and tell us, will this work? Does this make things better, clearer, better, more defensible for the practitioner themselves?
I'd be happy to take a look at that and be involved in that. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Are there public comments at this time?
This is the moderator. I do not see any right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Yamaguchi, are we ready to move on to number 7, which would be discussion and possible action on 2021 rulemaking proposal?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, indeed. The committee will remember we've discussed the program pass rate standards a number of times, and the staff has been working to get that initial filing moving along. We should be able to have some official language moved forward. We should be able to make the initial statement of reasons and move towards public comment very soon. Letter B, the Article 5 program standards. This is going to be an enormous undertaking. The NECs and most noteworthily our retired annuitant NECs and Schumann and Sewell and Clayworth have really just looked at this entire article and I think really parsed out the parts that were indistinct, unclear, obsolete, and the ones that are vastly in need of some more clarification, some things. And I think we've looked at the areas that have been, I think, a little bit fuzzy, that have created some uncertainty and some controversy even maybe over the past year. So this is going to be, like I said, a very large undertaking to really redefine, not even redefine, but clarify, tidy up, sharpen the standards for all the nursing education programs. The Article 5 for the psych tech law as well mostly will mirror the work we do with the VN's practice law. As I said, this is big, and the nature of rulemaking, and Ms. Turner probably has seen a lot of this in her life. It is such an intricate process. Just changing a period to a semicolon basically requires a definition, an explanation, and a rationale of why we must make this change. Is this going to affect local economy? So, like I said, it's a big project. We're moving right ahead, but we plan to make these onto our annual rulemaking calendar for 21, and hope to make a good amount of progress. Now it's the articles, it's letter C now that I had just been discussing a bit. As the committee and the board will recall, we've had a number of incidents where there has been some, we'll call it confusion and misinterpretation of what a psych tech and an LVN may do with regard to administering certain cosmetic treatments like Botox. And we've had some disciplinary cases and even court cases with regard to this. What we hope to do, first the board will be working on this, but then we hope to put some statutory language in the sunset bill, basically defining what our practitioners may and may not do. And then in the rulemaking process, I think really defining, really spelling that out. This is a fairly small piece of what we need to do, but I think it's really important because we've been seeing this, and I believe we will be seeing this more and more often, unless we have this language really clarified in our statutes and in our regs. So again, let me pause here for comments and questions.
This is Cheryl Turner. I am really interested in the cosmetic treatment area. With all the things being injected and the qualification of those that provide those services. And, most times people are going in, they're signing arbitration agreements, waiving rights, and not really seeing any real credentials for these services. So I think it's very important, that we have some stronger regulations on this. And so I'd be happy to work on this.
Thank you. We'll be taking you up on that.
Are there any further comments? If there are no board comments, can we see if there are any public comments?
No public comments at this time.
Thank you. All right, should we move on to item number 8, possible discussion and possible action on program and scope of practice decision-making process? Ms. Yamaguchi.
Thanks again, Madam Chair. This was brought forward for the board meeting in August, and the board decided that they really wanted to have this committee have a little bit deeper of a conversation about this process. Now, just as a brief update, while we believe that the delegated responsibility was originated in the mid to late 90s, we were only able to verify board action in 2003 that reinforced that. And the nature of the record keeping impermanence, shall we say, didn't provide us with a lot of details, but essentially the 2003 board delegation authorized the executive officer to take responsibility for a number of the intermediary decisions for education programs. Now, we laid this out for the committee in the table that's appended here. Essentially, we're looking at the very uncontroversial, quick decisions that, we review the reports that for programs that don't have any deficiencies or any problems, approving a program to start as long as there are no issues involved, allowing a program to continue, after their initial approval, requests to add classes, a request to admit students, minor changes in curriculum. So these decisions have gone from the NECs working specifically with the programs that they have been assigned to. The NECs provide a report, an analysis. The supervising NEC reviews that. They work back and forth to make sure that basically everything is included, that all the information is presented. And these reports are presented about twice a month with the NEC's meeting with the executive officer. And we've started to include legal counsel in these meetings as well. This is an important step, I believe, and we think it's really important that, well, first off, to clarify, all of the program recommendations and reports that the NECs provide are reviewed by the EO and the council, but these ones that are listed in this chart, this sort of decision, basically are allowed to move forward after the executive officer review. The others that you show, like the education committee and the board, those must move forward. Those do move forward first to this committee, and then based on this committee's approval to the full board for a final decision. I think this is really important, that a really important distinction to make for the committee and for the board, that we want to be absolutely certain that everything is reviewed for compliance, everything is correct, but also more importantly, that the programs all have the ability to present and answer questions and discuss with the board members, with the committee members personally, especially when they don't agree possibly with the NEC's recommendations. So that's how the system has been working over the past, I don't know how many years. Well, basically since 2003 is my understanding. Essentially, when I took office, I was not told that there was any other system at all. So for the past 3 years, that I know of, this is how we have been processing this work. Now, in terms of just the workload itself, our recommendation here is that the board authorize a continuation of this process. We think that this delegation makes a great deal of sense and certainly is a much more efficient way of doing business. I think it's good for the programs, that's good for the board itself. But without this delegation, this process probably starts to resemble, I think, or probably would mirror the way the board works with the disciplinary hearing and the petitioner cases that you review twice a month. So just by way of a parallel, a sort of illustration, that means that, essentially, I think you see essentially about a doubling in the processing. And the reason we think that this is a really important step to delegate is that while the decisions themselves are very pro forma, the amount of documentation to review is considerable. A program record survey, for example, could be dozens and dozens of pages. Most of these reports, they'll show a vast amount of information, which is all public record, which is all available to the board members, of course. But in order to review everything for a fast, yes, of course, they should continue. Yes, of course, they should, allow a new class to start. We feel like it would be a lot more efficient to go ahead and continue this process. So we would definitely recommend that first this committee and then the board approve the current delegation to the executive officer, and that would include specifically reviewing the reports that don't have any deficiencies or only minor ones. Initial program approval, that's a program that is just getting started. This is, yes, go ahead and admit your first class. Continued program approval, which would be a program that has been running for 1 to 4 years very successfully with very good records of their students' process. Request to admit classes, request to admit students, minor changes in curriculum, and changes in program hours, as long as, of course, they're compliant with the set regulations that set the minimum of program hours. So we would strongly recommend that the board continue to that delegation. Madam Chair?
Thank you so much for that review, Elaine. That was awesome. Are there any comments from the board members?
Yes, this is Cheryl Turner. Yeah, this is Cheryl Turner, and I was just wondering if we're unable to locate a record of having delegated this duty. Is this going to require some sort of legislation like delegation of default authority? Or is it something that we're expected just to vote on or approve? Or how would that work?
Thank you for the question, Ms. Turner. As far as I know, and council can correct me if I'm mistaken, this is a board policy. It does not require any statutory authority. And essentially, as I said, what we found was not specifically minutes, but a summation of the board meeting and I want to say February 2003, and I can certainly provide that for the packet in November. Essentially, this is a request for the board to basically renew that delegation.
Or ratify it?
Thank you for that
Hello,
clarification.
Mr. Swenson?
Madam Chair, this is Ken Swenson. I concur with what the executive officer just said. I wanted to mention that procedurally, this can be accomplished by a motion for delegation at the meeting. However, because there aren't regulations or statutes in place for the delegation, the best practice would be for the authority to make the determination to be delegated, subject to ratification by the board at the next regular board meeting. So what that would require to accomplish initially would be a motion by the full board to delegate authority to the executive officer for review consistent with the prior delegation. Then on a recurring basis going forward, for the full board to ratify the decisions of the executive officer at the next board meeting following the executive officer decisions. This procedure is something similar to what the Board of Registered Nursing is currently using for their processes.
Thank you, Mr. Swenson. Actually, I'm so glad you mentioned that because, Madam Chair, if I may, one thing that did fall by the wayside that I was not aware of in the past that the executive officer had prepared and appended to the executive officer report every quarter was a summation of those decisions. I think we prepared one and attached it to this report for the August meeting, but we absolutely believe that that's an important step as well. And thank you, Mr. Swenson, for reminding me of that part.
Hi, this is Donna. I just want to be sure that I'm understanding. So what we're talking about here, having been on the board for the past 4 or 5 years, it was always my understanding that for schools that are not on provisional and schools that are up and running, that the executive, we did have the executive officer approve classes and curriculum and whatever it was for those schools that were, again, not on provisional. And they did provide us with an update at board meetings about what they had done. And that is what we're talking about here, to continue with that, with that process that we've had in place. We're not talking here about delegating that to the Education and Practice Committee, and we're not talking about changing the piece where schools that are put on provisional come to the Education and Practice Committee to get put on provisional, and then schools that are on provisional go to the full board. We're not talking about those two things, but schools that are not on provisional and regular routine curriculum classes, that type of thing, correct?
Thank you, Ms. Norton. Yes, that's absolutely correct.
Okay, all right. And so what we need a recommendation, or do we need a recommendation from this committee to push that to the full board, which is what you have defined in the flow chart? Do we need a recommendation from this committee to do that?
Yes, please.
Okay. I would so recommend, in whatever sort of motion that Mr. Swenson needs in order to make it happen. If there are no further discussions by the board members and we haven't had public comment yet, so.
Yeah,
I think it's a good practice. I think it would be extremely, I think it would slow things down to have to bring it, to do it in any other fashion. Because we need the time to work with schools that have issues. I think it would be too cumbersome to do it any other way. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Norton. That was excellent. Are there any other board comments before we call for public comment?
Well, yes.
Oh.
I think both Mr. Swenson and Ms. Yamaguchi mentioned the possibility of having some sort of list or information provided to the board of the actions taken, and then seeking some sort of confirmation or ratification of those actions as part of what the board does, instead of them just go, and we can do it that way so that we can, at least continue to monitor what's going on.
If I may, Ms. Turner, yes, that's absolutely correct.
All right, are there other comments from the board members? Thank you so much. Could we see, are there any comments?
Madam Chair, if I may, you need a second for that motion, please.
Ms. Yamaguchi, can we make a motion before we call for public comment?
You can, actually.
Oh, okay.
And Ms. Norton moved. You need a second.
Then I would definitely second.
Well, under discussion, I don't believe that the motion added the information about the ratification, providing the list of decisions and ratification by the board.
Should we have a new motion, Ms. Turner?
So I would ask for a friendly amendment from Ms. Norton on that.
So my concern with your friendly amendment would be, I guess maybe perhaps I don't understand it. My concern would be when you're saying a ratification by the board, I believe that would hold things up. So these schools, especially these schools, they're not on provisional. They're just doing their daily course of actions. If the executive officer doesn't have the authority to approve what they've asked for, and it has to come before the board to be ratified, then there would be no point in giving the executive officer that delegation. So the way we had it in the past was the executive officer had the delegation, would approve what the schools needed, and would give us a report of this is what I have done. So that you could, in fact, stay up to date with what the executive officer had done, but the schools were not waiting for a board meeting to get what they needed. Does that make sense? So that's the only concern I have with your request to amend that.
Madam Chair, if I may, I'm sorry, Ms. Turner, I don't mean to interrupt, but if I may actually make a suggestion then. As the executive committee meets monthly, we could easily make this a permanent agenda item for the executive committee. And so if there are items that the execs think should be pulled off and forwarded to the full committee and then the board. That allows us to be a little bit more nimble, reflecting, I think, Ms. Norton's concern and my concern, really, because you're right. The whole purpose of this delegation was to be able to let the programs respond a little bit more nimbly and
Oh. May I
This
comment?
is,
Yeah,
Madam
Mr.
Chair,
Swenson? Yeah, Mr. Swenson.
I think one way to address Ms. Norton's concern and to also provide for a procedure for the board to consider the actions of the executive officer as suggested by Ms. Turner would be a motion to approve the program review process reflected in the flow chart, and for those approvals by the executive officer at the executive officer review be presented to the full board at the next regular board meeting for ratification. And then for a point of clarification, ratification would mean that the decision has already been in effect, the approval's already gone out, but then it's being ratified or subsequently approved and signed off on by the board. That eliminates the problem of lack of statutory or regulatory delegation, because if there is a problem with the existence of such delegation, by the board ratifying it afterwards, it has the same effect as if the board made the decision originally, but by having the delegation by motion to the executive officer for approvals, the approvals can take place sooner than the full board could consider it, thereby allowing the board staff to act and ultimately the board to act more nimbly with routine approvals.
Okay, could you put that in the form of a motion? So, well,
The recommended form of motion would be that the committee recommend to the full board that the program review processes set forth in the flow chart be adopted as the processes for the board, and that with respect to the executive officer review, that matters approved by the executive officer be presented for ratification by motion at the next regular board meeting following the approval by the executive officer.
Well, Mr. Swenson, then I would have then my concern would be, what if at the next board meeting, the board doesn't ratify what the executive officer is done? There could be like a 3-month delay.
Well,
compliance.
ratification would, in effect, the approval would already happened, and so
Right,
what
so then why would
ratification? Because it eliminates any question about the authority of the board to delegate this to the executive officer. So I suppose to make an analogy, it's kind of like a belt and suspenders. You've delegated the authority of the executive officer. The executive officer makes a recommendation, makes an approval decision, and then later on, after the approval has already been communicated, then it's ratified. It's either ratified or not. The approval has already been communicated to the program, and this would be limited solely to approvals. If there's a denial of a request by a school, that would have to go to the board.
Okay, I understand that. So let's say that for some strange reason, there was an approval made, and then when it came to the full board to ratify, the board said, no, we don't approve that. In that case, would what had been approved, unapproved, and the school would be notified that you're no longer approved of such? Would that be the purpose of that?
No,
Ratification? I guess
whole
I'm not
purpose of
understanding.
what the purpose of the ratification would be to solve the problem that might exist, since there's no specific statutory or regulatory authorization for the delegation that we're talking about. It's been a long-standing practice, but it's not specifically provided for in statute or regulation. In the absence of statute or regulation, a party might raise a question as to whether the board had authority for that sort of delegation. And
Okay.
by ratifying it after the fact, the board is correcting that potential problem. But the board would not, if the board did not ratify a specific approval, that still would not mean that the approval would not mean that the approval would be undone, because it's already been approved. And so there are other principles of law that would apply, and the board would be stopped from the subsequent failure to ratify because the approvals already happened and the programs relied on the approval to take whatever action was approved. So it would solely be ratification just to solve that problem of the potential lack of statutory regulatory authority in place at this time. If there's a denial, then that would have to go to the full board. But if there's an approval, then it's unlikely that a program's going to object to getting approved for what they asked for.
Yeah. Okay, I get it. I understand. All right, thank you.
Do we have a motion?
I'm going to try to repeat what Mr. Swenson said. So I move that the committee recommends to the full board that we approve the procedure, the process set forth in the flow chart attached to agenda item 5.B2, with the EO making decisions regarding minor issues like, well, they're not that minor, approval of programs and classes, etc., and that those approvals or recommendations be presented to the full board for ratification at the next board meeting after the decisions are made. Did I state it correctly?
I think that was pretty good. Mr. Swenson, was that correct?
Very well done. Thank you.
Okay.
I will second that motion. So, Mr. Swenson, do we need to call for a vote?
After
Because it's
taking
just-
public comment.
Yes, okay. Are there any public comments?
There are none.
Thank you. I'd like to call for a committee vote. Ms. Yamazola,
Yes.
Ms. Norton,
Yes.
Ms. Turner,
Yes.
and I vote yes. Okay, thank you very much. Shall we move on to item number 9, discussion and possible action on strategic planning, Ms. Yamaguchi.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much, committee, for the authorization recommendation. I think we might need to tinker a little bit with that wording, but nothing to change the import of the motion you made, Ms. Turner. Now, about strategic planning, it has been quite of a year, and I do apologize for us not being able to really spend any time, I think, really in-depth discussion on the strategic planning as set forth for this specific committee. I know you all remember the plan itself and the conversation we had last year, which specifically set forth the committee's own goals and objectives. Now, the one thing we've been recommending to the committees so far is we've been putting together a sort of a draft template, if you will, for the committee and the committee members with the specific goals and objectives for the committee, to enable the members to discuss who among the committee members would, for example, take on a specific piece of that plan or a specific goal, and think through a time process of how the committee members would be achieving those. Now, I think if you'll recall, and I apologize for not having the plan in front of us, the committee's own goals and objectives are fairly ministerial in nature. And we think that mostly these are achieved by the committee's regular business at its meetings, but there are a few specific things that we wanted to discuss to help us move forward. Now, remember, this is a 5-year plan, so we do, I think, have some leeway here, but we want to try and put together this chart for the committee and spend a good amount of time discussing, I think, the hows and the wheres of that. And then I think we need to start the process, starting in the committee's next meetings, to really, I think, review the overall process and the overall progress that BVNPT has made in achieving the main strategic plan goals, and then the committee discussing the specific committee members' plans and objectives. So we want to put this together for you. I'll probably send this out under separate cover for you to look at and really revisit the committee's plans and goals. And I think then, divvying up amongst yourselves the good parts, what you would like to spend time working on yourself as a committee member. I think there's a lot of really interesting challenges, but remember, though, these are very long-term goals, and a lot of them actually are more along the lines of studying and thinking, about the feasibility of some ideas. So at this point, as I said, let me stop and entertain some discussion, some suggestions, comments, questions.
Are there board member comments? Hearing no board member comments, are there public comments?
There are none.
Any further discussion, Ms. Yamaguchi?
No, thank you, Madam Chair. So what I will do, of course, is send out the draft of the grid that we've put together, along with the strategic plan itself, for the committee members to look over and think about before our next meeting.
Thank you so much. That'd be excellent. Agenda item number 10, discussion and possible action to make recommendations to the board. Considerations of placement of program on provisional approval, Summit College. Ms. Silverman, are you presenting this?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Hi. So if there's a couple mistakes that I would like to clear up before I present the case, if everybody could look at the enrollment table. On the third line where it says 21019, it's supposed to say 21020. And then if you move over to where admitted, it says number of students. From that point down, from the third line all the way to the bottom, it should say 40, not 45. When the program was given approval to admit as a pattern, the pattern that they were given was to admit 4 full-time classes of 40 students with 4 alternates until they started clinical. And that would be the reason for on the last 2 lines, there's 41 and 44 students, is because those 2 classes are not yet in clinical. They're in the beginnings of their programs, and then that's why they have more than the allowed 40 students. And I'm very sorry for the mistake that was made. But yes, I am presenting Summit College San Bernardino Vocational Nursing Program for recommendation of consideration to be placed on provisional approval. They previously had another director, and when that director left and this director, Dr. Jones, took over, documents were given to me because we were going through each of the cohorts, figuring out where everybody was and what clinical sites and et cetera. Documents provided to me by the program director showed that there was a lack of clinical facilities to accommodate the students' learning needs and the ability to meet the program's board objectives with live patient clinical placement. If you look at attachment B, you can see that the class that was technically supposed to graduate in November 12th started November 12th and supposed to graduate November this year. They normally have 315 hours of skills lab in their lab, which is fine. They're doing that in the lab. But of the rest of the hours, they only had 107 of live clinical hours. All the other groups, you can see I've separated out each cohort. The ones I've put in yellow at the time of the writing of this report, at the beginning of the month when I wrote the report, those were not in live clinical settings as of that moment. Now, since the second week of this month, they have obtained some live clinical sites, and they are now starting to put their students through their live clinical parts. So I'm hoping that they are going to have enough live clinicals to meet all of their objectives. If you look at the enrollment table, what's not said is that previous to this meeting, they have 2 classes that they're supposed to be starting in November. November 8th was going to replace that November 6th graduation class, but now that November 6th class, from my understanding of last conversation with Dr. Lauren Jones, is going to be postponed until December so that they can give these students some live clinical. I'm not sure about the evening class if they're going to still attempt to start that November class before it goes to the board meeting, since the board meeting is after that date in November. The other issue is that their NCLEX examination is showing a trending in the wrong direction. The last quarter, which you show on your report, which is April to June of 2020, shows that they were 4 percentage points below the state average. As of a couple days ago, the new result for the July through September came out, and they've had 29 candidates test during this last quarter. 15 passed, giving them a 52% pass rate for just the quarter, and their overall annual has now dropped to 69%, and they are now negative 9% below the state average. They're still in compliance, but they are going definitely in the wrong direction. Due to the fact of the lack of resources for this school, my recommendation is to place Summit College San Bernardino on provisional approval for a 2-year period beginning after the board meeting November 20, 2020. Issue, obviously, a notice, and then require the program to submit an action plan, which would demonstrate enough live patient clinical resources for their entire existing population of students for all terms. And that's my recommendation. Does anybody have any questions?
Thank you, Ms. Silverman. Are there questions from the board? Are there public comments?
There are the director from Summit. I am going to unmute her mic now. Joe Fox, your mic is unmuted. You may speak.
Hi, this is Joe Fox. This is Joe Fox. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you.
Thank you. I was waiting for Dr. Jones, our Director of Nursing, to weigh in, but maybe before she does, just thank you for allowing us to be on and to comment. This is my first experience with this board and this committee, and again, I appreciate the time. As the Chief Operating Officer for Summit, I guess I would just say that we have been impacted, like many schools, by this COVID pandemic. It has impacted our staff, our students, and our clinical sites. We've done, I think our staff has done a phenomenal job of keeping students engaged and in keeping them in the learning mode, sometimes via distance ed, sometimes online, sometimes with social distancing and masks during skills sessions. But all in all, we've done, I think, a really good job of keeping our students engaged and on track to complete their program. We did have a change in a Director of Nursing position. We did find that there were some issues that maybe had fallen behind, some of which is development of new clinical sites. But again, with the COVID pandemic and so many sites being shut down, we really had a list of sites that had given us approvals before and that we had students attending, but those got shut down. So the resources that we have, we still have, I think, adequate resources. We don't have the sheer volume of clinical sites we wish we had, but we are getting students scheduled. We're spending tens of thousands of dollars every week to have students COVID tested with a rapid antigen test so they can get results within 2 hours, because our clinical sites are now requiring weekly tests for our students to be in their site. We're not passing that cost to the students. We're incurring that cost, over $120 per student per test. So we're doing, I think, a good job of dealing with COVID. Clearly, we need to do a better job. We also lost contact with a lot of our students who were graduating and who had graduated and were preparing to test. They weren't able for, I guess, 2 months to come into the campus and prep and learn. So some of those folks went out and tested before they should have and before they were actually prepared, which is impacting our scores. All of these things are really important to us. We want to see our students succeed. We want them to go out and have a career in nursing. That starts with us. So I do appreciate the fact that I've been able to comment and give you a little feedback. And I want you to understand, all of you, that we really want our students to succeed. Putting us on provisional is certainly one avenue. We're going to make strides and put the efforts out and the required resources out to improve both clinical site count as well as our NCLEX prep. And so I being put on provisional for us as a business, the business of education, makes it more difficult. In any event, thank you for the time. I know Dr. Jones had some comments in her role as our Director of Nursing, so thank you for my time, and perhaps Dr. Jones has some comments.
I will unmute Ms. Jones' mic now.
Hi, this is Dr. Jones. I think, as Mr. Fox was saying, I'd really like us to take a much broader perspective of what's being suggested. The first one being that this program has been successful when it began in 1995. And in December of 2019, the board scores were above state averages. They were 88%. So this is not a long-term symptom of an issue of a program that is not doing well. That's the one piece that I'm really strongly reacting to right now. And in addition, Ms. Silverman has received last Friday each term, part-time, full-time, with the Shadow Health, which is virtual simulation for those who may not be aware of that. It included clinicals, and it included a day of actual on campus, which most of the students are several days a week anyway, of going through every skill that they need at the end of each term to make sure that we are accepting the next term, knowing what their preparation level is. And on the end, the other piece is that I am continuing to get new clinical facilities, but quite frankly, when you take your students out there, and I know I'm not the only educator who is experiencing this, when you hear, I'm sorry, we've got a COVID that just came in, you are not permitted to go in. That's also why I suggested about an hour and a half ago to have an ad hoc committee that really takes a strong look at some alternative clinical possibilities. I think when you're talking about an organization that went through a move from one building to another building with the students, with the faculty in March, and that also, by the way, was when COVID hit. And so those two things together really result in people who, number one, may not have had the same level, an even level of computer savvy. And a hybrid course is very, very difficult for faculty as well as for some students. So that piece has been worked out quite well. And instead of saying that we cannot admit students, I would rather say, let's take a look in 6 months how your board scores have improved.
Dr. Jones, thank you for your comments. Being a director myself, I understand that these are difficult times for all of us. Ms. Silverman, did you want to say something?
Yeah, one thing I forgot to say earlier is that the previous director did not submit a COVID-19 plan. So they did not have a COVID-19 plan. She assured me for months that they were still going to clinical sites. And what reality was happening is that she was just bringing them on campus to their skills lab. She did not have a per se COVID-19 plan or the objectives of all the levels of all of their clinical objectives and documentation of how they were going to meet. I will say, since Dr. Lauren Jones has taken over, they have purchased Shadow Health, and she is in the process of submitting a complete COVID-19 plan for that. But my concern is that I still believe this school needs to be closely monitored prior to any additional classes to make sure that the cohorts they currently have are being taken care of prior to admission of other cohorts. Thank you.
This is the moderator. I just heard from Ms. Norton. She had to log out and log back in, so if we can give her a moment.
Sure.
Ms. Norton, are you back on the line? Ms. Norton has not logged back in, so if you'd like to continue, I'll promote her as soon as I see her come back into the meeting.
Are there any further public comments? I didn't know if Dr. Jones wanted to respond after Ms. Silverman spoke. Are there any other board comments?
I have unmuted Ms. Jones' mic if she'd like to speak again.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate the opportunity. Again, I am looking at the educators in the room and in the rooms, I should say, and we are not the only school that is experiencing some issues, whether it's with hybridized learning, whether it is with finding other alternatives. I think we were very, very fortunate because of the population in San Bernardino, we were able to bring our students back into the labs. And I think that helped a whole bunch as far as getting them prepared to go back into those clinicals. And the role playing that we're doing right now with them, as well as the shadow health, will help them gain some kind of interpersonal skills. The skills, the actual physical skills, I'm not as concerned about as their ability to walk into a patient's room and be able to do critical thinking and care for them. And putting us off for not admitting anyone else, I don't believe is the solution to that issue.
Are there other comments by the board members? Further
Hi.
discussion?
Yeah, this is Paula Amazola. I would like, board member, I would like to ask our Ms. Silverman if we can get a general idea of how other schools are doing. We got an idea of how this school is doing, but I just would like to know how other schools are doing. It seems that we need to be considering very seriously the implications of the pandemic. And another aspect that is very concerning to me is that the Inland Empire is always underserved with healthcare providers, and that now during a pandemic is the time for us to ensure that we continue to provide licensed, trained, and effective nurses into that region of California. I just would like to know how other schools are dealing with the pandemic with regards to placements.
My schools that I have, all of my schools are doing, well, I shouldn't say all, most of my schools are doing a good portion of the skills lab in the skills labs. And as far as live clinical, they're all doing live clinical and they're all doing virtual clinical. Part of the problem with this particular school is that they did not submit a COVID-19 plan, which would allow them to do virtual clinicals such as shadow health, which they're just recently getting on board in the last week or so. They still have not correlated their shadow health to their curriculum. And so that's what they're in the process of doing now, is figuring out what simulations in shadow health that they can do to work with their own personal curriculum. I think they might ultimately have enough clinical sites, But the problem is that the way the system works is that without bringing them to you guys and putting them on provisional approval, or without you guys deciding to rescind their ongoing admissions, then we have no way of closely monitoring that this school has enough resources prior to admitting the next group of students. And the next group of students would be a day class and an evening class of 40 each and 4 alternates. So you're talking about 88 students being admitted without appropriate resources being validated.
Can we hear from the school? This is Paula Amazola again. Can we hear from the school about their COVID plan and if that will be submitted or what was the reason for not submitting their COVID plan?
I believe the COVID plan, this is Dr. Jones again. I believe the COVID plan was to have been submitted again, or was supposed to have been submitted, easy for me to mumble out, in March. And it was not. And I began there September 1st. And I think last week, Faye received again each of the terms, part-time, full-time, the particular programs that were pertinent to that term for Shadow Health, as well as the clinicals, as well as the full day of skills checkoff. And the other piece that that is being done there is, and I know most of you are familiar with HESI and Elsevier, and we are now mandating the adaptive quizzing so that that allows them individual feedback as to how they're doing and what their strengths and their limitations are within their knowledge, within their content areas.
This is Joe Fox, the Chief Operating Officer for Summit. I guess I would just like to comment and weigh in that it sounds to me like all of, or many of the other schools under Ms. Silverman's purview are in a similar situation. They're using a combination of skills, clinical sites, simulation, online resources, just like we are. The difference is an administrative error on the school's part where our director of nursing did not submit the COVID plan that was requested. Our former Don assured me that that plan was submitted. I've asked several times about it and was told it had been submitted. And for that, I should have asked to see it and see the email where it went. I did not. But for us to for you to get a recommendation that we be put on provisional because of an administrative oversight and that is being corrected. In fact, the COVID plan was submitted on Friday, but not in the format that was desired. So we are redoing it in a different format. We're also putting together the curriculum matching for one of the best simulation programs out there called Shadow Health, which we just invested $65,000 on Friday for Shadow Health for this term for our students. Those are two things that are administrative in nature that can be done this week. And if that brings us up to the same level as other programs, then I don't understand why we would be considered to be put on provisional. Thanks again for the opportunity to comment.
Yeah. Ms. Turner, Cheryl Turner, I have a question. Okay, we've spent some time addressing the COVID issue and the clinicals, but would you address for me the pass rate? I heard Dr. Jones mention at one point you had an 88% pass rate. In the documents, it shows a 75% pass rate, but then it was reported by Ms. Silverman that you have now a 69% passage rate, you know, as well as the ratio of instructors to students. I believe the report indicates that there are not enough instructors for the number of students you have at the school. So would you address those issues?
Sure, Ms. Turner. Again, this is Dr. Jones. There are about 35 full-time and part-time faculty, and we are continually requesting mini teachers. As a matter of fact, I have 3 this week for faculty candidates. And because I want them to do a mini teach in front of the faculty to see what their feedback is. I think, again, the HESI was not used consistently with the graduates who were there. And that 88% was just in December. So this has not been 4 years of, declining scores. Again, when you put, you're talking to an old psych nurse. So when you're putting together a change of a venue, when you're putting together COVID, when you're putting together teaching people how to use a computer, when you're teaching faculty how to do that and how to change their teaching strategies, all those issues lead up, and the fact that HESI was not used consistently, all those issues lead up to what the board scores are right now. And I know they're going to change. I've done that in San Diego at several schools, and I know it can be done here.
And this is Joe Fox. I would just add that we had a very solid and consistent process for preparing our students and eventual graduates for testing. And that process was very hands-on, was very face-to-face, where students were in the school quite frequently, even after they'd completed their program, prepping, and whether it was Hearst reviews or whatever, we had a lot of contact with the students and really helped them prepare to be ready. When COVID came along, we had to stop a lot of our face-to-face meetings for pretty much March, April, and most of May. With the different regulations that the state and the counties had for face-to-face. And with that, we had many students who felt they were prepared and they went out and tested before they were ready. And had we been able to keep our solidified process that we had going with a lot of face-to-face interaction, I believe those scores would have been significantly higher and the students would have been better prepared, not just for the test, but also for their entry into the career field. So again, it's not an excuse. I think it's a reason. I think we need to get better at now figuring out ways to help our students prepare in this new reality that we're all in. And we're doing that. And with Dr. Jones's direction, we're really jumping on that.
Mr. Fox, this is Dr. Mountain. I just want to say that you absolutely have my empathy because I'm walking those same shoes, but I want to present that Ms. Silverman is basically asking you guys to kind of take a pause. And it sounds like there was a lot of chaos when COVID hit, and I'm not saying that as a bad thing. I think a lot of programs went through that. We weren't prepared for what was coming. But I think what she's asking is that you just take a pause, make sure these students that you do have are ready, and that then you resume the kinds of things that you're obviously putting in place to try to do well by your students. And I appreciate your taking responsibility and doing a look back and saying, I should have looked into this. Because I understand there was a lot of chaos during that time. But I think to do service to our students, we have to kind of take that pause and say, how do I make sure that my program is prepared going forward? And I think my sense is that's what Ms. Silverman is asking that your program do. And I appreciate Dr. Jones, and it seems like she's really got a handle on things, and that you guys will put things back together and return to that situation that you were in previously.
Yeah, thank you. I would just say, I think taking a pause is certainly one solution. I think we can also attack the problem without taking that big a pause. When you operate an educational institution as a business, which we need to do, that's the type of environment we operate in. Every change that we make relative to new students and therefore tuition and revenue has an impact on the school and has an impact on all the other students. And when you take a pause, if I take a pause and say I'm not admitting students for a period of time, that means I have to do staff reductions because I can't carry those salaries for a time without the tuition revenue to support it. You know, our schools are not supported by state grants or endowments or anything else. It's straight tuition dollars from a student that takes care of our salaries and our light bills and our mannequins and whatever else. So I understand the concept. Take a pause so that you can catch up with this. I think we can do both. I think we can catch up without taking a pause. Maybe we take a partial pause. Maybe we agree to have a reduced number of students start in our program in November and forward for a period of time. But we have the resources to support students. What we didn't have was a COVID plan that was submitted on time and matching curriculum to the new shadow health simulation, which we learned about. And as far as the NCLEX scores, that's something we're already jumping all over. So I do appreciate the concept of taking a pause. It's just difficult when you have a business and you're planning the financial side of the business. And I know that's sometimes in conflict with education, but we are a business as well.
Are there other comments for the board, or Ms. Silverman, would you like to respond one more time?
The classes that I highlighted on that appendix are just now getting back into clinicals. They've had, some of those classes have had no live clinical until the last couple weeks. All the ones that are highlighted in yellow are just now starting back, getting back into clinical. I truly believe, as you say, they need a pause so they can get all these classes caught up, that they are not giving their students live clinical to be able to meet their IP objectives.
Ms. Yamaguchi or Mr. Swenson, are we to make a recommendation to the full board, or how do we proceed for this committee?
Madam Chair, yes, the action item before the committee is to recommend placing Summit College on provisional status.
Is there a motion from the board?
A question. This is Paula Amazola. Is that the only motion we can move forward?
No, actually, another option would be to recommend to the board to remove their ongoing admissions, which would then facilitate the school producing documents prior to each admission to me, and then I would take those documents, if it was a positive, if they produced all the documents that would be a positive result, then that would go to the executive officer committee. As you guys talked about previously, that would be the other option that we would have.
And that would mean that they're not on provisional, but they're submitting extra.
That would mean they would not be on provisional, but they would have to submit documents prior. It would be, I think it's 8 weeks prior to each start, they would have to submit documents to me, and I would review the documents, and then I would write a report to the executive officer to recommend that should they don't have enough resources at that time to it not be a positive recommendation, then it would come back to the board.
And what's that process called so that I can put a motion together? That is.
It would be to rescind ongoing admissions.
Okay. So this is Paula Amazola, public member, and I would like to put a motion together to rescind admissions. Is that what you said?
Ongoing admissions.
Ongoing admissions, and I think that's it. Anybody would like to second?
The procedure would be to recommend to the full board that ongoing admissions for the program be rescinded. Because the committee itself has the power to make that determination, would have to go to the full board.
Thank you so much. Okay, so the motion is to recommend to the full board to rescind ongoing admissions for the San Bernardino. I want to make sure I get the right name. The San Bernardino Place Summit College San Bernardino Vocational Nursing Program. Is there a second?
Well, I'm skipping over to kind of to the discussion, and do we have any feedback from Dr. Jones, or is it Mr. Fox on that as an option?
I do see that Dr. Jones's hand is still raised. I don't know if it's from previous, but I will unmute.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Two things, and again, it is not my intention to mess up your group process right now or move your motions at all. But I just wanted to point out two things. That number one, this term that Ms. Silverman is talking about is over November 6th. So this is not like we need to be continuing to work with these students for months and months and months before they graduate. That's what we're doing right now. And to, again, stop any kind of movement at all would not be in terms 1, 2, and 3's best interest. And I'm back to Mr. Fox's piece. I think it would be judicious to limit our next admissions to 25 or 30, because that would allow a lot of the clinical facilities to be secured as long as COVID continues to not flare up and resurge like it is doing right now. And it would also allow us to continue to expand our shadow health.
This is Paula Amizola. I would like some clarification with regards to if the school, so if we have two options, which option will ensure that the students will receive what they need, the ones that are ongoing, and I am concerned that if this or a business was to default, that the students who are not graduating may be left without the resources they need. And so I'm just looking out for the students and ensuring that you have proper resources to ensure that whoever you have in there will finish the program and that they can enter the workforce. And I thought that the provisional will hinder this process, and that's why I asked for another option, which would just require ongoing monitoring. And I would like to hear from the school if that's something that they would like to pursue.
I think the ongoing monitoring would be great.
Okay.
Ms. Amizola, this is Joe Fox. I'm not sure why I've got an echo. Hopefully you're not hearing that.
We are not.
Good, great. As a business, again, I will just say continuity is important for us. Stability is important for us. We are financially sound. The students that are in school are all certainly going to be taken care of. Any new students we bring in will be taken care of. Like most businesses, we put out a 1-year budget and then a 3-year, 5-year forecast to figure out where we're going and how we can best support students and our other customers, which are healthcare facilities that hire our graduates. So for us to be on provisional would be very, very difficult. We would figure out a way to make it work. It would not be ideal. For us to have our continuous admissions status rescinded and then have to get approval every time we are going to do a start every several months, and then submit 8 weeks ahead of time significant documentation for review, and then I don't know when we find out if in fact that start is approved. I mean, we're enrolling students 6 months out from a class start because they need to plan their lives. And you reflected on the Inland Empire and the challenges many of our students have even coming to school and making this work. So for us, continuity is important. Being able to plan is very important. We have the resources. We are viable. We will continue to be viable, which is why we are able to spend the money we're spending on getting students tested on a weekly basis. Imagine getting 270 students tested each week at $120 a student. Now, I'm not asking for your sympathy on financials. All I'm saying is that's an unplanned expense that we have, and we're willing to do it instead of requiring that students just go to free clinics and get tested and wait 4 days or 5 days for a result. We need them to be in the clinical sites that are open. So again, thank you for your question. For us, we would love to be able to demonstrate to all of you the improvements we're going to make and are making already and show you how it's working. But to do that without the restrictions of saying, well, maybe you'll have a start in February, maybe you won't. We'll have to decide at a later date. That's difficult. Again, thank you for your question.
I have to respond to that really quickly. Mr. Fox, I appreciate all your comments. I appreciate that you're a business, but the job of the board is to protect the public. And so, although I appreciate so much the Inland Empire, I really do believe needs LVNs. That isn't our concern. Our concern is to protect the public, and so we take that into accord. And also, I find the response of the board, because I deal with them all the time as well, you don't usually have to wait. If you're asking for another class, Dr. Silverman will look back, review things, and gets back to you in a very timely manner. Once again, I come back to this whole thing of when things start to cycle out of control, that sometimes it's just best to take that pause and get things back in order, and then everything will fall into place the way it's supposed to. And I don't see this as a punitive thing at all. I see it as a positive thing where she is trying to provide support to you and say, let's look at this, let's negotiate it, let's see how you do. And I've never heard from anybody that she works with that they had to wait for responses from her. So I just want to set your mind at ease on that's not the intent of the board at all. And I don't see that as the intent of any of the NECs here. They're very responsive, and they understand you have a business and that you need that continuity. But I still see the trajectory of what she saw happening there as something that's a red flag, and the need to protect the public and the need to protect these students as they become nurses. Because I personally wouldn't want somebody taking care of me who'd never taken care of a real patient. And so I really think that this is a large overviewing thing that we have to look at every facet of it. So I just had to bring that up.
And I truly appreciate that. And I think we actually agree on that 100%. I mean, protecting the public is also in my best interest for what our mission is and what we do. Forget the business piece of it. It's what we do in preparing students. It's what I've done for 30 years in preparing our sector of students. And so, yes, I agree with you. The only area I might differ a little bit is whether or not we need to take a full pause. So, but thank you. I do appreciate the reminder.
Are there any other comments? And did we make a motion? I'm sorry, I'm a little confused at this point.
Yes, this is Paula Amazola. We have a motion on the table. I guess I'm going to ask one more question of the school. The motion is so now that there's some clarification on the process, does the school agree with the recommendation from the NEC?
I guess I would have to ask which recommendation, because the recommendation that was put before the board or before the committee was to recommend to the board that we go on provisional.
So my second recommendation was to move forward to the full board to vote to remove the ongoing admissions, which would allow you and your director to submit to me at any point documentations that you have enough clinical sites and resources to start your next class. And then that way, I would write a report and then it would go to the executive officer instead of you having to go to the board, and you would not be on provisional approval. But you would still have to provide the documents 6 to 8 weeks prior to a request to start a class. But that's something Lauren and I can work out so that if you have resources, we can keep a schedule.
I understand. Thank you for that clarification. And yeah, that is absolutely a much better situation for us. And I very much appreciate you putting that out as an option. So yeah, that we would agree to that.
And I also think, Faye, that you and I were going to start doing that this Friday.
Correct.
Okay, so
This
thank
is
you so
Donna.
much.
I just have a question. So I'm wondering if there's a way that the school can be held to, and it's difficult to flip back and forth here, can be held to the program requirements that are listed. Vicki, can you scroll down so I don't have to flip back and forth? When I flip back and forth, my computer just goes all crazy.
Yes, Ms. Norton. Well, how far would you like for me to go down?
So oh, here we are. Is there a way that the school can be held to the program requirements without being placed on provisional?
Yes, Donna. Donna, that was the motion that's on the table right now, which is to do to go recommend to the board I'm sorry, I forget the actual term, but it's basically to get approval from the executive officer instead of the board, and they would submit ongoing extra documentation as proof. So
Donna, I would rewrite the top part of the report and to remove the provisional approval if you guys wanted to recommend removal of ongoing admissions, and I can leave the program requirements as stated so they would stay on there as well.
Yeah, that's what I was curious, because that would still require them to submit an action plan to develop their live clinical resources. It would still require them to fix everything that's lacking here. It would require them to notify you if the class had been displaced from clinical sites. So it would do everything that we wanted to do without placing them on provisional.
You are correct, Donna, it would.
Okay.
I have a question. Someone interjected and mentioned that they were planning to start this procedure beginning on Friday, and I just didn't quite understand what they meant by that.
That was Lauren, the director of nursing, and we're planning on working on Friday, working on helping her get her action plan together and her COVID-19 plan. We'd already set up a day to work on that together.
Okay, that was Lauren.
Madam Chair, this is Ken Swenson. I wanted to clarify that the recommendation as written would be amended to strike out existing paragraphs 1 and 2 and to replace that with a paragraph that would read the program's ongoing approval for ongoing admissions would be rescinded, and then existing item 3 would become item 2. Is that what you have in mind for the revisions?
Was that question to me?
Yes.
Yes, that's what I was planning on doing, is removing 2 and changing 1 to removing the ongoing admissions, and then number 3 would become number 2, and to still comply with all the below requirements.
Okay.
And is that the motion we have on the table now?
Well, there is not a motion on the table. A motion has been made, but it has not been seconded at this point.
I think we're trying to clarify that that's what the motion is.
Yes, the motion was to send to the full board a recommendation to replace the program's approval of ongoing, rescind the program's approval of ongoing admissions, so that the school is not placed on provision, but they're submitting documentation to ensure that they have the resources for the students.
Nice. I would second that motion. Mr. Swenson, is that all right? And can we call for a vote of the board?
Just so we're clear on what the motion is then, it's to recommend to the full board the revised recommendation of the NEC, which parenthetically is along the lines of what you just stated.
Yes.
Yes, yeah, then so that's been properly moved and seconded, and it's ready for discussion and public comment.
Is there any further discussion from the board members? Is there any public comment?
I do see Dr. Jones's hands up. I will unmute her mic.
Yes, I just wanted to say that on behalf of terms 1, 2, and 3, thank you.
All right, I'd like to call for a vote of the board. Ms. Amazola?
Yes.
Ms. Turner?
Yes.
Ms. Norton?
Yes.
And I'm yes. All right. We'll move on to 11, which is public comment on items not on the agenda. Are there any further public comments? Okay, having no further public comments, we'll move on to item 12. Are there suggestions for future agenda items? Are there any
No public comment.
Thank you.
Hi, this is Paula Emazola. I wanted to suggest an agenda item. Is this the time to do it?
Ms. Yamaguchi, would this be appropriate?
Yes, ma'am, it certainly would.
Okay.
So I think it's important for us to have a discussion, just so that moving forward, when we come across schools such as the school we had today, Place Summit College, San Bernardino, that you know, and if they're having some COVID difficulties, because as we all discussed, we're going to have COVID difficulties for, you know, a few months or a few more years. And I just want to make sure that every school that is coming before us, that we are looking at standardizing the process on how we review their difficulties due to COVID, and have something like a standard conversation on how we're going to deal with the school's difficulties, because I believe we're not we're going to get more of these schools as the challenges continue to grow. We're going to get more schools, and I just want to be fair and have a standard process that we take a look at, and I think that this is the place to have a discussion before we move it to the full board. And I'm not sure like what that looks like, because today was the first time that we've encountered someone that was having difficulties because of change in leadership and what the pandemic has done to the opportunities for their students. So that's I would like to discuss COVID implications for schools.
I absolutely agree with that. Ms. Amazola, absolutely support that, but I think it goes hand in hand with what was proposed at the beginning of this meeting, to have a discussion with schools about what they're doing and how they're utilizing different educational modalities, because I think things are changing drastically within education at this time, and we're going to continue to see those changes. And I think this is a discussion we need to have, but we need to have it after we have the presentation on these different modalities that are available. I think it will cement where we need to go to create some standardization.
Okay, so that seems fair. Thank you.
You're welcome. Are there other suggestions for future agenda items? Are there any other public comments?
I still see Dr. Jones's hands up, so I'm going to unmute her mic again.
I apologize. Apparently there is some kind of hand that needs to be diagnosed here because it's raising itself. Again, I apologize, guys.
Okay, thank you so much. All right, if there's no further comments, are there any other further comments? I will adjourn this meeting. Thank you all very much for your attendance and your participation.
I believe we need to vote on the adjournment, don't we?
I don't, Mr. Swanson, we don't,
No,
No,
That's not
okay.
necessary.
adjourn the meeting, correct?
correct.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.
Thank you. Recording is in.